Well, good evening. Let's see. All right, we're working. Good evening. All right. So we only have like about 30 minutes, and then after that, we'll just rally back at the tables back there, and Bill's class is going to do about 30 minutes as well, and then they'll rally back there also. Have a seat. All right, so this is the series we've been going over, and just by a way of recap, what we've been trying to do the last couple weeks is neither one of us has lived in the 1800s. We weren't alive when Joseph Smith started the Oates Church, So we cannot prove without a shadow of a doubt that all this is a man-made religion or a satanically inspired religion. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to look at all the evidence for the religion itself. So what we did last few weeks is we looked at the quad, which was the LDS scriptures, and we looked at, this is just a list of 18 problems within the LDS scriptures. And there's a lot of more problems that we've discussed in the last few weeks. So what we're trying to do is what's known as abductive reasoning. You're trying to look at all the evidence and see what is the best explanation for the evidence that lies in front of us. And so we looked at, is it more reasonable to conclude that all these issues is still a divinely inspired gospel message? Or are all these issues indicative of the fact that this is man-made and it's a made-up religion? So we consider that abductive reasoning. We also talked about what's known as, there we go, Occam's razor. Oh, you're good. Occam's razor. So this is the philosophical principle that the explanation that has the least amount of assumptions or least amount of things you have to explain, the least amount is most often the better explanation for something. And so when we're looking at least these 18 issues, and there was a lot more we talked about, what is the best explanation? What is the least amount of assumptions regarding this religion? And we saw that they have to explain away at least these 18 problems to include what we saw last time, were the 230,000 plus people that died in upstate New York in this final battle in the 4th century AD. So Occam's razor teaches the fact that you have to make so many assumptions, you have to explain away so many things to make this appear to be a divine, God-instituted religion. Otherwise, if you just look at this is man-made up, we can see why there's a lot of problems, a lot of inconsistencies, a lot of issues within it. That has the least amount of assumptions. So we're looking at these things from that aspect. So tonight we're going to be looking at Joseph Smith. This is going to be 2 parts because I don't have a whole lot of time. We only have really 24 minutes left. And I just really want to talk about one aspect of Joseph Smith. But before we do, I want to go ahead and introduce the journalist that really caused the most damage for the Mormon Church. This is an Austrian journalist, Wilhelm Ritter von Wimmetal. He goes by the alias of Dr. Weil. He has written this book called Mormon Portraits. Basically, this book was published in 1886, and this book is an interview of him with a lot of people that were associated with the LDS Church. Similar to the Book of Mormon, which had your 3 witnesses and your 8 witnesses that testified to the golden plates, this book has endorsements from many people. So when this Dr. Weil guy published this book, he had all these endorsements from people that were alive at that time that could be fact-checked about what he's writing about. One of the guys, James McGuffey, says he was baptized in the Mormon Church 45 years ago. He knew all those that were implicated in Mountain Meadows Massacre. He was cut off because he couldn't convince himself that murder and stealing were agreeable to God. So this guy spent decades in the Mormon Church, was kicked out because he couldn't tell himself that, hey, it's okay to steal. So another person by C.G. Webb says he was in the Mormon Church for over 50 years, intimately acquainted with Joseph Smith and his family for 11 of those years. So this is a guy that gives an endorsement of this book that knows the people, the places, the situations that had occurred. There's another guy by the name of Joseph Salisbury who says the writer has been associated with Mormons for a period of over 30 years. So just like the Book of Mormon that has their testimony, there are 11 witnesses total that could verify, you can talk to them. This Mormon Portraits book has all these endorsements from people, let alone the interviews inside of the book that can be fact-checked during the time of the publication. So this was a very big book when it was produced at the time. All right, so we're going to talk briefly about polygamy and polyandrous relationships with Joseph Smith. If anybody knows anything about Joseph Smith, the one thing they probably know is the fact that Joseph Smith was charged with committing polygamy. If you've ever studied it, you will most likely have come to this website with this graphic. This graphic is found at wivesofjosephsmith.org. This graphic talks about 34 wives that Joseph Smith supposedly had during his life. That being said, in Dr. Vile's book, Mormon Portraits, he interviews a lady by the name of Mrs. Pratt. And in the book it says, in one of my many interviews, with the age, lifelong martyr of polygamy, I once said to her, I have seen a statement in a book that Joseph had 80 wives at the time of his death. Is that true? Mrs. Pratt smiled and said, he had many more, my dear sir. At least he seduced many more. Sarah Pratt is the wife of one of the originating founders of LDS Church, Orson Pratt. He's a big name within the LDS religion. Sarah is his wife. She's on record of saying that he had at least 80 wives and seduced 80 wives. That's why this chapter is called the Don Juan of Nauvoo. Don Juan is a fictional Spanish character that was known for seducing a lot of women. So Joseph Smith was known and he was characterized as a seducer of women. And so when we have this list, a lot of times people are like, oh, there's no evidence he was married to all these people. People will argue against it. But Orson Pratt's wife, Sarah, is on record of saying, yeah, he's at least seduced over 80 women. And so it's kind of incriminating. But if we look at this list, there's 34 wives listed. Sarah Pratt said it was over 80. The guy that was interviewing, Wilhelm, asked, I heard it was 40. And she goes, oh, many more. This list only has 34 wives. So let's look at this. There were about 6 wives that were under 18 years old. Okay. Now, a lot of us were like, ooh, weird. But you got to remember, back in the 1800s, the legal age to get married, depending on the state you were in, was actually 14, so long as you had parental blessing. Just because Joseph Smith, I'm just playing devil's advocate, just because Joseph Smith married a 15-year-old or a 14-year-old, in our culture, right, no. Back in their day, it was culturally statewide accepted depending on the state that you lived in. But today, it's like, like a 40-year-old man marrying a 14-year-old girl, there's something wrong with that, obviously. But I just wanted to pull that fact up, that in the 1800s, it was actually legal to go ahead and marry at 14 with parental consent. With that, the bigger issue I want to look at is what's known as polyandrous relationships. This is the fact of somebody marrying somebody that's already married, okay? That's like if I think his definition is self-explanatory. Let's just say that. So if you look at this list, there's multiple wives on here that were married at the time that Joseph Smith married these women. So Joseph Smith's very first wife was Emma Hale, Emma Smith. Originally, her parents did not approve of Joseph Smith, and then later, I guess they did. So she was Joseph Smith's first wife. Fanny Alger was his second wife. And there's a couple big names on this list. Fanny Alger is one of the biggest names on this list. Another one is by the name of Helen Mar Kimball. Helen Mar Kimball is 14. This is another very interesting, if you want to look into wives of Joseph Smith and sort of look at the details behind how did this marriage, take place, if you will, Helen Mar Kimball and Fanny Alger are pretty interesting stories to actually look at. And then Eliza Snow as well, Eliza Snow. So Joseph Smith not only married multiple women, but he married multiple women that were already married. So let's look at some things. We've been to this website plenty of times before, FAIR. It's the LDS apologetic website. They point out the fact that these polyandrous marriages are a problem, cause trouble with members of the church. They go on to say, to complicate the issue further, they don't understand a lot about Joseph Smith's polyandrous relationships or marriages. So what they try to do is they try to break it down into different categories of these women that were already married. So the first category they say is, okay, Joseph Smith married some non-Mormon women, non-Mormon, husbands, if you will. So these are people that were not a part of the church. He brought them in and was sealed to marriage with them. LDS Apologetics reveals at least 3 of those types of marriages. At least one of them was married to a LDS woman who had an unfaithful LDS husband. So the husband was not a faithful Mormon, but he was a Mormon. And there is at least one record of this type of marriage. Then there were 6 who were married to faithful Mormon men that Joseph Smith also married. And so if we look at this, the LDS Apologetics website admits to at least 10 marriages that Joseph Smith married a woman that was already married, which is completely illegal. Remember, back in this day, polygamy was illegal. This is one of the big issues that the states had with the Mormon church, was their practice of plural marriage. And so we're seeing all these things are taking place. Now, question is, okay, so if Joseph Smith had 40, 80 wives, whatever the case is, surely he's got to have descendants, right? Surely there's all his descendants, all his kids, all his grandkids should DNA match to Emma Smith, and only Emma Smith, right? Because that's his very first wife. That should be his only wife. There's supposedly been no DNA evidence of any supposed descendant from another wife of Joseph Smith. So there's supposedly been no DNA proof of these plural marriages that any of them came from anyone other than Emma Smith. They point this out. So the question is, why? Well, Ms. Pratt says that there's a doctor by the name of John C. Bennett, and there's a lot of abortions that took place. So much so that there's this other lady says many little bodies of newborn children floated down the Mississippi. This is a big scar within Mormon history, is the very heavy practice of abortion. So what seems to have happened is when Joseph Smith had this other wife gets pregnant. Joseph Smith covers up the pregnancy, covers it up. John Bennett ends up doing an abortion. There's actually, in here it says large scale, showed instruments. There was a house in Nauvoo, Illinois, right across from the flat. That was a kind of hospital. They sent the women there. And so, why do we not have any descendants with DNA match? Possibly, and it's a plausible explanation, that all those babies were murdered to protect Joseph Smith's identity, character intact. I want to point out the fact that Joseph Smith is on record of lying about being in a polygamous relationship. He straight up lied. Now, if this is a prophet of God, granted, no man is perfect. But if you're saying this is an institution that God ordained as an everlasting covenant, why would you lie about it? So let's see some things. In this book by Dr. Richard Bushman, he talks about Fanny Alger, who was 14 when she joined the LDS Church in 1830. It says in 1836, after a time of serving a serving girl in the Smith house, she left Kirtland and soon married. And it's somewhere between those two dates that Joseph Smith probably married her. What's interesting about this is when you look into Joseph Smith and the servant girls in his household, and you read more, not just this book, Mormon Portraits, but other books, to include this one, there's a lot of discussion regarding these servant girls that Joseph Smith would try to seduce as well. In there, there's testimonial evidence. You can't prove it, can't verify it, corroborate it today, but there's testimonial evidence that he would try to seduce all these servant girls in his household. So, how did he lie about polygamy? Again, the Times and the Seasons magazine, newsletter, whatever you want to call it. This is dated in November of 1841. In this, in page number 939, they say, inasmuch as this Church of Christ has been reproached with the crime of fornication and polygamy, we declare that we believe one man should have one wife and one woman, one husband, except in the case of death, when either is at liberty to marry again. So in LDS publication, they're on record to saying, no, we're being charged with polygamy, we're being charged with fornication. No. We hold to the fact that marriage is one man and one wife, one woman, one husband. Oh, we're not doing polygamy. This is in 1841. Now, if you remember, let's see, right here, there's multiple women that have been married to Joseph Smith before 1841. He had at least 5 wives. Before 1841, one of Joseph Smith's early scribes, Oliver Cowdery, he's one of the 3 witnesses, if I'm not mistaken. I believe he's 3 witnesses. He's one of Joseph's early scribes for the Book of Mormon. He actually writes a letter to his brother Warren about this dirty, nasty, filthy affair of Joseph Smith and Fanny Alger. Okay, remember I said Fanny was a big name. Oliver Cowdery is writing to his brother about this affair that Joseph Smith is having with Fanny. Remember, Joseph Smith was married to Emma. From here, Oliver challenges Joseph Smith. This is interesting because Joseph Smith apparently started a rumor that all this was made up, and that Oliver Cowdery recanted on it and apologized for falsely incriminating Joseph Smith. But here's a letter from Oliver Cowdery that said, I've learned from Kirtland by the last letters you have publicly said that when you were here, I confess to you I willfully lied. This compels me to ask you to correct that statement and give me an explanation. So Oliver is challenging Joseph Smith, saying, hey, I'm hearing you're telling people that I lied. No, you need to correct that statement right now. And we're going to deal with this when we meet. Okay, what happens next? Oliver Cowdery gets kicked out the church. This is proceedings, April 11th of 1838. Oliver Cowdery gets excommunicated. All right. So now Joseph Smith is having a difficult time concealing polygamy, his polygamous relationships, his polyandrous relationships. So now this is the history of the church, according to Joseph Smith. This is like that 7-volume set in my office that you can look at. It's pretty much the autobiography of Joseph Smith. And in volume number 5, he gets the Doctrine and Covenants revelation, 1843, that polygamy is justified. And so in 1843, he gets this revelation in Doctrine and Covenants 132, and polygamy is now justified. So, the LDS Church, they can't do anything about this, so they're admitting to it, they're acknowledging it. And so let's look at some things. Timeline. First, 1827, he marries Emma. Then he marries Fanny. Oliver Cowdery confronts Joseph Smith January of 1838, or he writes his brother, and then he confronts Joseph Smith. He's kicked out of the church. From there, he marries a couple other women. And then he lies about polygamy in that Times and Season magazine, right? And then he gets a revelation from the Lord that polygamy is okay. This is all documented through LDS publications and writings as well. And so he's straight up lying about these things. So, this brings me to what's known as the Nauvoo Expositor. The Nauvoo Expositor was a newspaper organization that started up with a bunch of, with about 7 or so ex-Mormons, all right? So they got out of the Mormon church. They're like, this is totally not of God. What's happening is very wrong. I can't make stealing agreeable to God. We saw that statement before. So they started what's known as the Nauvoo Expositor with the sole intention to go ahead and reveal the doctrines and the practices of the Mormon church. William Law, we can actually find evidence that William Law, Joseph Smith, tried to marry his wife. And then with this other guy on the bottom, Robert Foster, that Joseph Smith, there's testimonial that he tried to seduce Foster's wife. And they're like, we're not having this. We don't believe in this polygamy stuff. It's not from God. We get out, we start this news organization. We want to go ahead and put Mormon doctrine, Mormon teaching, Mormon practices, and Joseph Smith on blast. This, stay away from. So they start this. All right? So there is this guy that wrote the Mormon Portraits, again, Dr. Wilhelm. He interviewed a man by the name of Dr. William Law. He interviewed Will. If you were wondering what, I was trying to find this newsletter from Utah. Thank you, Will. You helped me out. This is from the Salt Lake Tribune. This is a 2-part interview from 1887 where William Law was interviewed by this Austrian journalist about what was happening within the Mormon church, what was happening with Joseph Smith, and things of that nature. He also talks about the destruction of the Nauvoo expositor. In here it says, Law started a newspaper in Nauvoo to expose the fraud, but it was destroyed by a mob. The Nauvoo expositor only produced one article, or one production, one publishing. It was that very first one we showed, because a mob destroyed the Nauvoo expositor. This is good. So, 1844, there's a city council. Before it's destroyed, there's a city council that's held, like, hey, you have the Nauvoo expositor. They're talking about all this incriminating evidence as far as the Mormon church, Mormon doctrine, things of this nature. What do we do? Is this legit? Should they be shut down? They went ahead and issued and said that the Nauvoo expositor is a public nuisance. Most of the people on this council, most of the 50 people were Mormons. It gets better, though. So the second part of this, you are hereby commanded to destroy the printing establishment press from whence issues the Nauvoo expositor. And the typeset presenting says, offered to your execution by the owners, others demolish the house, and if anyone threatens you or the mayor or officers of the city, arrest those who threaten you and fail not to execute this order without delay. So they were ordered to destroy the Nauvoo expositor. Signed the mayor of Nauvoo. Joseph Smith was the mayor. Joseph Smith's council was made up of Mormons. The mayor was Joseph Smith himself. Joseph Smith ordered the destruction of the Nauvoo expositor because of all the incriminating evidence that was coming out with his polygamous relationship. If we go through this again, he's lying about polygamy in 1841. He finally receives this revelation of plural wives. And then the Nauvoo expositor has this expose on Smith, and it's destroyed under Smith's orders. There's a lot more that can be said on all this. And maybe we'll revisit some of these things next week when we have time. But Joseph Smith's a straight up liar. He lied, bold-faced lied about committing polygamy and polyandrous relationships. He tried marrying women that were already married. Some said no, some said yes. I can give you testimonial evidence that he threatened their eternal exaltation on it. I can give you all this stuff as well. The guy really sought to live up to his nickname, the Don Juan of Nauvoo, the seducer of Nauvoo, Illinois. And so when we're building this evidence to see whether the Mormon religion is legitimate, and we're looking at abductive reasoning, we're looking at all the evidences, all the stuff, all the problems within it, we got to ask ourselves again, what's the most likely explanation? He's straight up lying about polygamy. He's coming up with a revelation years after he was, could no longer conceal his polygamous relationship. Now the Lord told me that it's supposed to be okay, and it's retroactive, if you will. We got to wonder, is this a man-made religion because of a Don Juan that wants to go ahead and seduce a lot of women? Or is this actually of God? And the more evidence, the more Exhibit A, Exhibit B, Exhibit C we have on there, it's up to you and I to make the decision as the judge and jury. When we look at the evidences, what convinces you and I more? The fact that all of this is made up, or the fact that God's behind all this. It's got to be a man-made religion or a satanically influenced religion. There's no way around it. And so next week, we'll go ahead and revisit a little bit of this. We'll get into his upbringing, the fact that he was a master mason, his father was a master mason. We'll get into other testimonials. We'll look at extortion practices. We'll cover a lot of things next week. So there will be a lot of evidence we're going to get into as well. So that's that. Any questions about what we talked about this evening? No? All right, like I said, it's going to be a short one tonight because we're going to end up packing for tract and treat candy. And so I'm just going to close with prayer, and then we'll see everybody else in the back of the auditorium if you'd like to stick around and help out. If not, we'll see y'all on Wednesday. God, Lord, I pray again for fruitfulness of this study and the fact that this isn't just mere head knowledge, but that we can realize that, this is not of you. So, Lord, allow us to be able to take this information, again, to solidify us and firm us in our faith in the true Jesus of the Bible and the true gospel. And, Lord, just allow us to recall this information maybe when we're trying to reach somebody considering Mormonism or trying to help pull somebody out of Mormonism, Lord. And so we just pray that the Spirit would use this on your time. Thank you and we love you. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Amen.